Hey.
"You paid for me. Now do it." The rancher did, and suddenly he had a wife.
Are you all right?
John's ranch was his world. From sunrise to sunset, he worked with the cattle, repaired fences, and tended to the land that had been in his family for generations. The ranch was big, and it needed constant care, but John never minded the hard work. To him, it was more than labor. It was a way of life. It was steady, predictable, and honest. He had never married, not because he couldn't, but because his life had always been devoted to the ranch. Friends often teased him at the local diner, asking when he would finally settle down. He would only smile, shrug, and return to his coffee. For John, companionship was a distant thought, something he admired in others but never felt he needed for himself. The ranch was his partner, the cattle his family, and the land his home. Meanwhile, life outside the ranch was very different. A few miles away lived Maria and her family. Maria was young, only in her early 20s, but she carried the weight of her family's struggles on her shoulders. Her parents had worked hard all their lives, but bad luck and changing times had left them with debts they could not easily repay. In their small town, families sometimes arranged marriages to secure financial stability, a practice that was becoming less common but still existed in certain areas. For Maria, this meant that her life might not entirely be her own to decide. Maria was strong and clever, but life had taught her to be cautious. She had dreams, like any young woman, dreams of traveling, learning new things, and finding love, but she had learned to keep them quiet. She knew that her family needed her. She had no choice but to consider options she would never have thought of in a different situation. It was during one ordinary morning that the worlds of John and Maria collided. Maria's parents approached him with a proposal that shocked him completely. They asked John to accept Maria as his wife. There was no romance, no courtship, only a straightforward, practical arrangement. They explained that the family had offered a bride price, a sum of money meant to secure Maria's future and relieve some of the family's burdens. To them, it was a sensible solution to a difficult problem. To John, it felt entirely unreal. John stared at Maria's parents, unsure what to say. He had heard of such arrangements before, but they were usually distant stories, never something he had imagined for himself. He was practical, yes, but this went beyond practicality. It felt sudden, strange, and complicated. Yet beneath his initial shock, a small voice of curiosity stirred. Who was this young woman? What would life be like with someone else on the ranch? Could it work? Maria, for her part, felt a mix of fear and frustration. She did not know this man at all. He was a stranger, and yet, suddenly, he was expected to become her husband. She feared being trapped in a life she had not chosen, but she also understood her family's situation. She could not afford to reject the arrangement outright. Her heart was heavy with uncertainty, and every step forward felt like a gamble. The first meeting between John and Maria was awkward and quiet. John was polite but distant, not wanting to offend, but also unsure how to react. Maria, cautious and wary, measured her words carefully, trying not to show fear or frustration. There was a tension in the air, a mix of anticipation, hesitation, and unspoken questions. Both were trying to imagine what life together might be, even though neither knew what that would look like. Over the next few days, Maria visited the ranch occasionally. John watched her closely, noticing small things. The way she moved with care around the animals, how she observed the land with curiosity, and how she tried to help without overstepping. She was unfamiliar with ranch life, yet she adapted quickly, showing intelligence and determination that surprised him. John had expected someone timid or overwhelmed, but Maria was neither. Despite the initial awkwardness, small moments of connection began to appear. John would catch her looking at the horizon with a thoughtful expression, and he felt a strange admiration for her. Maria, on the other hand, began to notice John's quiet strength, his dedication, and the way he cared for every detail of the ranch. She realized that beneath the rugged exterior was a man who valued honesty, hard work, and integrity, qualities she respected deeply. The community soon learned of the arrangement. Gossip traveled fast in small towns, and everyone had an opinion. Some people were supportive, seeing it as a practical solution for both families. Others whispered criticisms, questioning the morality or wisdom of such a decision. For John and Maria, the opinions of others were a constant background hum, but they had to navigate the reality of living together despite uncertainty. Every day brought new challenges. Maria struggled to adjust to ranch life, waking early to help with chores she had never imagined doing. John struggled to imagine his solitary life being shared with someone else. Yet in the small details, the way Maria learned to ride a horse, the way John patiently taught her to care for the cattle, the quiet evenings on the porch watching the sun set, the beginnings of understanding began to form. Both John and Maria were learning to navigate the unexpected. Neither had chosen this path entirely, yet both had to walk it together. The transaction that had brought them together slowly gave way to a deeper, unspoken curiosity about each other. What kind of person was the other? Could they find respect and understanding in a situation that had begun as a necessity? The ranch itself seemed to respond to this new presence. The fences were repaired faster, the cattle seemed calmer, and even the dogs acted as if they sensed a change in the air. John noticed it, and though he could not explain it, he felt a subtle shift in his life, a small opening where a new chapter might begin, even if he was not yet ready to admit it. Maria, too, felt the stirrings of something unexpected. She had entered this arrangement reluctantly, fearing loss of freedom, but she began to see possibilities. Life on the ranch was hard, but it was honest. The work was demanding, yes, but it was real. And in John's quiet way, he was not the stranger she had feared. He was someone she could respect, and perhaps, eventually, someone she could trust. The first weeks passed with a mixture of tension and tentative connection. They did not speak much about emotions or expectations. Words were carefully chosen, gestures were deliberate, and yet the smallest actions, offering a hand when lifting a bucket, sharing a quiet meal after a long day, began to build the first foundations of a shared life. As the sun rose and set over the endless plains, John and Maria learned to coexist. The transaction that had brought them together remained in the background, a reminder of why they were here, but the present demanded attention to survival, work, and the beginnings of understanding. Neither knew what the future held, but both were quietly learning that life could be more than duty. It could hold the possibility of companionship, respect, and perhaps even unexpected friendship. The ranch, vast and open, seemed to mirror their lives. At first, it felt daunting and overwhelming, full of work and uncertainty. But with each passing day, as they worked side by side and navigated the routines and challenges, it began to feel like a space where something new could grow. The land was alive with potential, and perhaps so were they. By the end of this first chapter in their lives, neither John nor Maria could say what the future would bring. The arrangement that had seemed like a simple solution to a family problem had become a complicated, uncertain journey. Yet in the quiet moments, the shared laughter over small mishaps, the mutual respect for each other's skills, the silence of the evening porch, they found a fragile, growing connection. And in that, both sensed that life on the ranch was about to change in ways they could not yet imagine. Life on the ranch was not easy, and for John and Maria, it quickly became clear that living together would be full of challenges. Maria had grown up in a small town but had never experienced the hard work of ranch life. The days were long, beginning before sunrise and often ending well after sunset. She had to learn quickly how to care for the animals, mend fences, and help with the chores that seemed endless. At first, everything felt overwhelming. The weight of responsibility pressed on her, and she often wondered if she could manage. John, on the other hand, had spent his entire life on the ranch. He knew every corner of the land, every need of the cattle, and every weakness in the fences. But now he had someone else in the mix, a stranger, someone he had not chosen to live with. He felt a strange tension between the desire to help Maria learn and the need to maintain his routines. There were moments when he would catch himself being impatient or critical, though he tried not to show it. He didn't want to scare her off or make her feel unwelcome. The first week was the hardest. Maria struggled to carry buckets of water to the livestock, stumbled while handling the horses, and often got mud on her boots in the early morning dew. Every mistake, small as it was, made her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She worried constantly about what John thought of her. Was she too weak for ranch life? Did he regret agreeing to this arrangement? She forced herself to keep going, determined not to fail, but each day ended with exhaustion and doubt. John, for his part, noticed her determination. Though she made mistakes, she never gave up. She asked questions when she didn't understand, she listened carefully, and she tried her best to follow his instructions. He began to see her differently. She was not just a young woman forced into an arrangement. She was clever, capable, and strong in ways he hadn't expected. Slowly, his initial skepticism began to shift toward respect. Even with growing respect, there was still tension. Both John and Maria were cautious around each other, unsure where to draw boundaries. At mealtime, they would sit quietly, sometimes sharing small talk about the weather or the work of the day. John, who was used to silence, found her presence strangely comforting but also unsettling. Maria, who had feared being trapped in an unfamiliar life, began to notice small kindnesses in his actions, like making sure the coffee was hot in the mornings or fixing a broken tool before she even asked. As days passed, they began to communicate better, but it was still slow and awkward. Maria had a quiet determination to prove herself, not just to John but to herself as well. She wanted to show that she could handle the challenges of ranch life, that she was not helpless, and that she was worthy of respect. John, meanwhile, began to open up in small ways, revealing his thoughts about the ranch, the land, and his life. He spoke about his childhood, the lessons he learned from his father, and how he had grown into the man he was. One afternoon, a small incident changed the atmosphere between them. A calf had wandered off near the edge of the property, and Maria noticed it before John did. Without hesitation, she ran toward it, guiding it safely back to the herd. John arrived just in time to help, but he could not help noticing how brave and determined she had been. For the first time, he saw her not as a stranger or a responsibility, but as someone he could depend on. The incident sparked a small conversation between them. They laughed at the near disaster, sharing stories about their past experiences with animals. Maria talked about growing up around smaller farm animals, while John shared tales of riding horses and working cattle since he was a boy. The laughter eased some of the tension, and for the first time, the day didn't feel so heavy or difficult. Despite these small victories, the challenges of living together were far from over. There were still disagreements about how chores should be done, moments of frustration when things went wrong, and times when exhaustion made both of them irritable. But each day, they were learning more about patience, compromise, and understanding. John began to see that Maria's mistakes were not a sign of weakness, but a part of learning. Maria realized that John's strictness came from care and experience, not from judgment or disdain. As the week turned into weeks, routines began to form. Maria learned the rhythms of the ranch, the way the cattle moved, the patterns of the weather, and how to handle the horses with confidence. John began to appreciate her effort, noting her improvements and even joking with her on occasion, something he had rarely done with anyone. The ranch, once a place of solitary work, began to feel alive in a new way. There was a rhythm now, a sense of shared effort, and a quiet acknowledgement that they were beginning to function as a team. Evenings brought a different kind of challenge. After a long day, both were exhausted, but there was also the quiet loneliness of the house to consider. They were learning to navigate living together under one roof, sharing a space that had once been entirely John's. Maria often wondered how long it would take before they could truly feel comfortable around each other. John, too, found himself thinking about her when she wasn't around, wondering how she was feeling, if she had eaten enough, if she was warm enough in the chilly nights. The community remained watchful. Neighbors would stop by occasionally, offering advice, compliments, or sometimes judgment. Maria felt the eyes of others, noticing the subtle glances and whispers. John was protective, not wanting her to feel uncomfortable or unwelcome. He began to act as a buffer between her and the community, quietly ensuring she felt respected. This small gesture did not go unnoticed by Maria, who began to understand that he cared more than he let on. One day, a small accident occurred that could have changed everything. Maria slipped while carrying hay and hurt her ankle. John rushed to her side, helping her sit and carefully tending to the injury. For the first time, Maria felt a sense of safety she had not expected. She realized that he would not let harm come to her, that he would protect her as best he could. John, seeing her vulnerability, felt a protective instinct he had never experienced before. It was a moment of connection, quiet but powerful, that neither could forget. Over time, these small moments began to add up. Each act of help, each shared task, each laugh or shared silence created a bridge between them. The initial fear and awkwardness were slowly replaced with trust, respect, and a growing understanding of one another. Maria began to feel less like a guest or a stranger, and more like someone who belonged, at least in the daily rhythms of the ranch. John began to see that having someone else around did not take away from his life. Instead, it added a new dimension of companionship and shared purpose. Yet, they both knew that feelings were complicated. Neither wanted to admit it aloud, but they were beginning to care for one another. Maria noticed when John watched the sunset and thought of her, when he left small notes or reminders, or when he would bring her a warm drink on cold mornings. John noticed Maria's laughter when she successfully completed a difficult task, her pride when she learned something new, and her quiet moments of reflection that reminded him of his own youth. As part 2 of their story came to a close, the ranch was no longer just a place of work. It had become a place of learning, of small victories, and of unexpected connections. John and Maria had survived the first weeks of living together, learning to navigate the challenges and complexities of their unusual arrangement. They had started to understand one another, not through grand declarations, but through simple acts of effort, care, and mutual respect. The foundation of something deeper had begun. Trust was growing, respect was established, and the first hints of genuine companionship were emerging. Both John and Maria knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There would be disagreements, challenges, and moments of doubt. But they had discovered something important, that even in unexpected situations, two people could begin to find understanding, and perhaps even friendship. The ranch, vast and open, reflected the possibilities of their journey. Just as the land demanded care, attention, and patience, so did their relationship. The first weeks had been a test, a trial of endurance and learning. And in passing that test, both John and Maria had proven something to themselves. They could adapt, they could work together, and they could begin to trust the unexpected path that life had placed before them. Life on the ranch continued with its rhythm of early mornings, long days, and quiet nights. John and Maria had grown used to each other's presence, though both still felt the weight of the unusual arrangement that had brought them together. Their days were filled with work, small victories, and the gradual discovery that living together was slowly becoming easier. Yet nothing could have prepared them for the sudden event that would change everything between them. It began with the sky. On a hot, dry afternoon, Maria noticed the clouds gathering in the distance. They were dark, heavy, and moving faster than any storm she had ever seen. The wind began to pick up, rustling the leaves and bending the grass across the fields. John, busy checking the fences, noticed it too and frowned. Storms came suddenly in this part of Texas, and they could be dangerous. The cattle had to be secured, the barn doors had to be locked, and anything left in the open had to be moved. Maria watched John move with purpose, his years of experience evident in every decision. She felt a twinge of fear. She had never faced a real storm like this before, especially not while responsible for a ranch full of animals. Her heart raced as she helped gather the tools, secure the gates, and herd the cattle into a safe area. John noticed her courage and quick thinking, and a flicker of admiration passed over his usually stoic face. She wasn't just helpful, she was brave and resourceful. The storm hit harder than either of them expected. The wind tore across the fields, bending the trees nearly to the ground. Rain came down in sheets, flooding the lower pastures and making the dirt slippery and dangerous. The cattle became restless, some panicking and trying to break free. John barked instructions, moving quickly to calm the animals and secure them. Maria followed closely, holding gates and guiding the frightened herd. Their movements were coordinated, almost instinctively, as if they had been working together for years rather than weeks. At one point, a calf broke through a fence and ran toward the open fields. Without thinking, Maria ran after it. The mud and rain made it nearly impossible to keep her footing, but she did not stop. John saw her sprinting across the wet ground, and despite the danger, he ran after her. Together, they managed to corner the calf and guide it back to safety. Soaked, exhausted, and muddy, they stood for a moment, catching their breath, and something unspoken passed between them. In that moment of shared danger, trust and respect deepened in a way words could not convey. The storm continued through the night, battering the ranch with wind, rain, and thunder. They worked tirelessly, taking turns to check on the animals, repair fences that had been broken, and move supplies to safer locations. Maria, who had once feared she was too weak for ranch life, found herself acting with confidence and courage she didn't know she had. John, who had once worried about having her around, realized how invaluable she had become. She was not just a helper, she was a partner in every sense. During a brief lull in the storm, they took shelter in the barn. The rain pounded the roof, and the wind howled through the gaps in the walls. They sat on a pile of hay, shivering, wet, and tired. Neither spoke at first. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was a shared acknowledgement of what they had faced together. John finally broke the quiet, his voice low but calm. "You did good today," he said. Maria looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. It was the first time he had directly praised her, and it carried more weight than any words he could have spoken before. Maria felt a warmth in her chest that she had not expected. She had been afraid of this man, afraid of the arrangement that had forced them together, but now she felt something entirely different. Respect, trust, and perhaps the beginnings of admiration. She smiled, a small, tired smile, and said, "We did it together." John nodded, and in that simple acknowledgement, something shifted between them. They were no longer simply coexisting. They were facing life side by side as equals. The storm raged on outside, but inside the barn there was a strange sense of peace. They worked together, laughed when a small animal startled them, and shared stories to pass the time. John spoke about the ranch, about his childhood, and about the lessons he had learned from years of hard work. Maria shared her own stories, about her family, her dreams, and the challenges she had faced growing up. For the first time, they were truly opening up to each other, not out of obligation, but because they wanted to. By the time the storm finally passed, The ranch was damaged but intact. The cattle were safe, the fences were repaired as best as possible, and they had both survived a night that tested their courage, skill, and resilience. They stood together outside, watching the morning sun break through the clouds. The air smelled fresh and clean, and the ground was wet and muddy but alive. They looked at each other, exhausted but satisfied. There was no need for words. The night had spoken for them. In the days that followed, life on the ranch returned to its usual rhythm, but something had changed. Maria and John no longer approached each other with caution or distance. They had faced danger together and had seen each other's strengths in a way that could not be ignored. John began to trust Maria's judgment more, allowing her to take the lead in certain tasks. Maria began to feel confident in her abilities and in her place on the ranch. Their partnership had been forged in the fire of the storm, and it was stronger for it. Neighbors and friends who visited the ranch noticed the change as well. There was a new energy in the way John and Maria worked together. People commented on their efficiency, their coordination, and the quiet respect they showed each other. The community, which had once watched them with skepticism, began to see the potential for something real and meaningful in their relationship. The storm had not only tested their skills, but had also revealed their character. John realized that Maria was capable of more than he had ever imagined. She was not simply a young woman caught in a difficult situation. She was strong, intelligent, and brave. Maria realized that John was not just a distant rancher, set in his ways. He was honorable, caring, and willing to share his life and responsibilities with someone else. As they repaired the remaining damage from the storm, they shared quiet moments of conversation and laughter. They discovered shared interests, mutual respect, and the beginnings of friendship. The storm had forced them into situations that revealed who they truly were, beyond appearances and initial impressions. It had shown them that they could rely on each other, trust each other, and perhaps even care for each other in ways they had not anticipated. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the fields, John spoke softly. "I didn't think we'd make it through that storm without losing something," he said, his eyes on the horizon. Maria turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "We made it through together," she replied. The simplicity of her words carried weight, and John nodded. He realized that this was more than a shared experience. It was the beginning of something deeper, something neither of them had expected when the arrangement had first been made. The days that followed were filled with small acts of care and consideration. John would leave tools in places where Maria could reach them easily. Maria would check the fences and gates without being asked, anticipating what needed to be done. They began to communicate without words, understanding each other's rhythms and needs. The storm had created a bond that could not be broken, a silent understanding of trust, respect, and partnership. Maria began to feel at home on the ranch in a way she had never imagined possible. The work was hard, but it was meaningful. The land, the animals, and the tasks gave her a sense of purpose. John began to see life differently as well. Having someone to share the work, the challenges, and even the quiet moments of reflection made him realize that life could be richer and more fulfilling when shared. The storm had been a turning point, not just in terms of the ranch, but in terms of their relationship. They had moved beyond the initial awkwardness and fear that had defined the early days. They had discovered each other's strengths, weaknesses, and courage. They had learned to trust, to respect, and to rely on each other in ways that went far beyond the practicalities of ranch work. As part 3 of their story came to a close, John and Maria were no longer simply two people living under the same roof. They were partners, allies, and friends. The storm had shown them that they could face challenges together and emerge stronger. It had revealed qualities in each other that they admired and respected. And though they did not yet fully understand the emotions that were beginning to grow between them, they both sensed that their lives had been changed forever. The ranch, battered but resilient, reflected the transformation in their relationship. Just as the land had weathered the storm and would continue to thrive with care and attention, so too would their partnership. The trust, respect, and subtle affection that had begun to form would guide them through the days ahead, shaping their lives in ways they had never anticipated. In the quiet aftermath, as they tended to the last of the repairs, both John and Maria understood one simple truth. The storm had not just tested them, it had brought them together. And in that togetherness, they had discovered the first hints of something far more powerful than either had expected. Life on the ranch after the storm was calmer, but it was far from easy. The storm had tested John and Maria, and in surviving it they had formed a bond neither could ignore. Yet, life was not just about them. The world outside the ranch, the neighbors, friends, and family, had opinions, and those opinions brought new challenges. Maria noticed it first. When she visited the small town to buy supplies, she felt the eyes of people she barely knew. Whispers followed her down the aisles of the store. Some were curious, some were critical. She had entered the arrangement reluctantly, and now the community was watching her, judging her every action. Maria tried to ignore it, but it was difficult. She felt a mix of embarrassment, frustration, and worry. Would people ever see her as more than a transaction? Would they understand that she had begun to build her own life, her own place, on the ranch? John noticed it too. The neighbors who had once been friendly now spoke with raised eyebrows and cautious words. Some offered advice unsolicited. Others questioned why he had agreed to the arrangement in the first place. John, who had always preferred quiet, avoided confrontation, but he also refused to let anyone belittle Maria. Slowly, he began to defend her quietly, speaking up when people doubted her abilities or intentions. His protective instinct grew, not just for her safety but for her dignity and sense of belonging. The ranch itself demanded attention as well. Repairs from the storm were ongoing, and there was work to be done every day. Maria and John worked side by side, learning to anticipate each other's movements and needs. The coordination between them grew stronger. Maria learned to read John's instructions before he even spoke them, and John began to trust Maria's judgment in ways he never had before. Yet, challenges remained. They disagreed at times: how to fix a fence, how to care for a sick animal, or even how to divide chores fairly. These disagreements tested their patience and communication, but they also taught them the value of compromise. One afternoon, a situation arose that threatened to spark a real argument. A shipment of supplies arrived late, and some of it was damaged. John wanted to discard the spoiled goods immediately, while Maria suggested trying to salvage what they could. Tension grew as they each argued their point. Both were tired from long days of work, and their tempers flared briefly. Then Maria paused and said calmly, "John, I know you think it's not worth the effort, but I think we can make some of it useful." Her tone was respectful but firm. John looked at her, realizing that she had a point. With a sigh, he agreed to try her suggestion. They worked together and, to their surprise, managed to save some of the supplies. The incident became a small victory, teaching them the importance of listening to each other and respecting different perspectives. While life on the ranch was physically demanding, it was also emotionally challenging. Maria sometimes struggled with feelings of isolation. The community was still wary of her, and her family was far away, relying on her to send money and updates. John noticed these moments of quiet struggle and offered small gestures of kindness: a warm meal waiting for her after a long day, a quiet walk through the fields, or a shared joke to lighten the mood. These acts, small as they seemed, deepened their connection. Maria began to feel less alone, and John began to see how much he cared for her well-being. Not everything was smooth. The family pressures that had initially brought Maria to the ranch continued to linger. Her parents occasionally sent letters asking about money or updates, reminding her of the obligations she could not ignore. At times, she felt torn between her duties to her family and her growing sense of belonging on the ranch. John recognized her struggle and offered support, encouraging her to find balance and assuring her that he would stand by her no matter what. His understanding made her feel valued not just as a helper or a daughter, but as a person. One evening, a neighbor stopped by unannounced. They had come to ask about the storm and to check on the ranch, but their tone carried curiosity and judgment. "So, how's the new wife handling ranch life?" they asked, with a hint of disbelief. Maria felt a flash of embarrassment, but John stepped forward calmly. "She's doing very well," he said, his voice steady and confident. "She's learned a lot and she's helped save more than you might think." The neighbor paused, perhaps surprised by his defense, and left without further comment. Maria looked at John with gratitude. His quiet support had shielded her from humiliation and reminded her that they were beginning to function as a team together. The animals also played a role in their growing connection. There were moments when a calf needed care, a horse required attention, or the cattle had to be moved quickly. In these moments, Maria and John relied on each other instinctively. Their cooperation during stressful situations strengthened their bond. Maria gained confidence in her abilities, and John learned to trust her judgment. Through shared responsibility and mutual reliance, the initial transactional nature of their relationship began to fade, replaced by genuine respect and care. One particularly difficult day, Maria fell ill. She had been overworking herself, trying to keep up with all the chores and responsibilities, and exhaustion caught up with her. John noticed her weakness immediately and insisted she rest. For several days he took care of her, preparing meals, tending to chores, and ensuring she had everything she needed. Maria, who had always been independent, felt a deep sense of gratitude. She realized how much she relied on John's presence and care, and in turn, she understood that he valued her more than she had imagined. The experience brought them closer, highlighting the emotional depth of their partnership. Through all of these challenges, small moments of joy appeared. Maria discovered a love for tending the garden behind the house, where she grew vegetables and flowers. John began to appreciate her touch on the land, noticing how she cared for the plants and the animals alike. They shared meals together, sometimes laughing over simple mistakes, sometimes sharing quiet conversations under the wide-open sky. These moments became the threads that wove their lives together, creating a sense of home and belonging. Their relationship with the community continued to evolve as well. Neighbors who had once been skeptical began to see the changes in both John and Maria. They noticed her growing confidence, her competence with the ranch work, and the respect John showed her. Slowly, opinions shifted from doubt to admiration. People began to offer help, advice, or simple acknowledgement of their partnership. The outside world, which had initially added pressure and tension, began to recognize the strength of their bond. Despite progress, there were still internal struggles. Both John and Maria had moments of doubt and fear. Maria sometimes worried that the partnership was built only on circumstance and that John might not truly value her. John, meanwhile, occasionally wondered if his feelings were real or just a response to necessity. These quiet uncertainties were never voiced openly, but they lingered beneath the surface. Yet the shared experiences of hardship, care, and small victories gradually dispelled these fears. With every challenge overcome together, their trust and understanding deepened. One day, as they repaired a fence broken by last year's storms, Maria paused to watch John work. She noticed the concentration in his eyes, the strength in his movements, and the quiet determination that had always defined him. For the first time, she allowed herself to see him not just as a provider or authority figure, but as someone she could admire and care for. John, glancing her way, caught her gaze and saw the respect, gratitude, and something more in her eyes. Neither spoke, but the moment carried significance they both felt deeply. By the end of part 4, their lives on the ranch had changed in ways neither could have predicted. The initial arrangement, which had seemed transactional and limiting, had grown into a partnership built on trust, respect, and shared experience. They had faced challenges together, both from the land and from the world around them. They had learned to communicate, compromise, and rely on each other in ways that went far beyond the original agreement. While feelings of uncertainty still existed, there was also hope. John and Maria had discovered the value of companionship, the strength of mutual respect, and the beginnings of emotional connection. The ranch was no longer just a place of work. It had become a home, a space where two people could grow, learn, and begin to understand what it meant to live together with care and intention. The consequences of the storm, the opinions of the community, and the challenges of ranch life had all served to shape their relationship. Each obstacle had tested them, but each had also brought them closer. They were no longer strangers bound by circumstance. They were partners, friends, and perhaps something more. As they stood together one evening, watching the sun set behind the hills, both John and Maria understood that life would continue to be challenging. There would be disagreements, misunderstandings, and moments of doubt, but they had learned that they could face those challenges together. The trust and respect they had built were strong, and the quiet connection that had grown between them was undeniable. The ranch, alive with the results of their labor and cooperation, reflected the growth of their relationship. Each repaired fence, each cared-for animal, and each planted garden became a symbol of their partnership. Through patience, understanding, and shared responsibility, John and Maria had transformed a situation born of necessity into one of real, meaningful connection. Life on the ranch had settled into a rhythm, but it was no longer the same as it had been before. John and Maria had grown from cautious acquaintances into partners who trusted and relied on each other. The storm, the challenges, and the struggles of daily life had transformed their relationship into something real and lasting. Though neither of them had expected it when the arrangement began, they had found companionship, respect, and the beginnings of affection in the most unexpected way. The morning still started early. The sun rose over the vast plains, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. Maria would wake first, sometimes quietly preparing coffee, other times tending to the garden before the day's work began. John would join her shortly after, moving with practiced ease through the barn, feeding the cattle and checking fences. Their movements had become synchronized, almost instinctive. There was no need for lengthy explanations. Each knew what the other was doing and what needed to be done. Their efficiency was born from weeks of shared labor, cooperation, and mutual respect. The work was hard, but it was rewarding. Maria had grown confident in her abilities, no longer hesitant or unsure. She could ride the horses with skill, care for the cattle, and manage the land as competently as John. People in the community began to take notice, offering compliments and even seeking her advice on tasks she had once thought she could never manage. Maria felt a sense of pride, not just in her work, but in the knowledge that she had earned her place on the ranch. John watched her with quiet satisfaction, recognizing her growth and knowing that she had become more than just a partner in work. She had become an essential part of his life. Despite the physical demands, they also began to enjoy the small pleasures of life together. Evenings were often spent on the porch, watching the sun set and listening to the quiet sounds of the ranch. They shared stories, joked about minor mistakes, or simply sat in silence, comfortable in each other's presence. These moments were not grand or dramatic, but they carried a weight of intimacy and understanding that neither had expected. The transactional nature of their relationship had long faded, replaced by genuine companionship. One day, as they repaired a section of fence damaged by a wandering cow, Maria paused to look at John. His face was focused, his hands steady and his movements precise. She realized, as she often did now, how much she admired him, not just for his skill or knowledge, but for his patience, his quiet strength, and his dedication. She felt a warmth in her chest, a feeling that had grown steadily over weeks and months, a mixture of respect, gratitude, and something more tender. John noticed her gaze and smiled, a rare and genuine expression that made Maria's heart flutter. In that simple moment, unspoken feelings passed between them, acknowledged without words. The community, which had once been skeptical, gradually accepted the changes. Neighbors who had doubted Maria's abilities now saw her as capable and strong. Those who had questioned the arrangement between John and Maria began to respect the partnership they had formed. Their bond, built on shared effort, trust, and mutual support, had become visible to everyone around them. The respect of the community was satisfying, but it was not the most important change. The most significant transformation had occurred within John and Maria themselves. John began to reflect on his life before Maria. He realized how lonely his days had been, filled only with work and solitude. He had thought he was content, but he had not truly understood the meaning of companionship until now. Maria had brought not just help, but joy, perspective, and care. He found himself thinking about her even when she was not around, wondering how her day had gone, if she was warm enough, or if she had managed to rest. He began to understand that life was richer when shared, and that partnership could bring fulfillment beyond what he had ever imagined. Maria, too, reflected on her journey. She had entered the arrangement reluctantly, feeling trapped and uncertain. She had feared losing her freedom and being confined to a life she did not choose. But over time, she had discovered strength, independence, and a sense of belonging she had never expected. She realized that John valued her not just for her labor or presence, but for who she was as a person. She felt gratitude, respect, and slowly, an affection that went beyond friendship. The arrangement that had begun as a necessity had transformed into something genuine and enduring. Their connection deepened in subtle ways. John would bring Maria flowers from the garden, small gestures that spoke volumes about his growing feelings. Maria would prepare a favorite meal for John after a long day, noticing the fatigue in his eyes and the effort he put into every task. They celebrated small achievements together, the successful repair of a fence, the birth of a calf, or a bountiful harvest from the garden. These moments of shared joy strengthened their bond, building memories that neither would forget. Challenges still arose, but they were faced together. A sudden illness among the cattle, unexpected storms, or equipment failures required cooperation, problem-solving, and patience. Each obstacle reinforced their trust in each other and highlighted the strengths they had discovered in one another. They no longer faced difficulties as individuals. They faced them as a team, confident in their shared abilities and commitment. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat on the porch with a quiet contentment. The air was cool, and the sky was painted with the colors of dusk. Maria spoke first, breaking the silence. "Do you remember how different everything was when I first came here?" she asked. John nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "I do. I wasn't sure how it would work," he admitted. "I thought it would be just practical, but it became so much more than that." Maria looked at him, her eyes soft and thoughtful. "Yes. I never imagined I could feel at home somewhere like this, and with someone like you." John reached out, gently taking her hand in his. The gesture was simple, but it spoke of trust, care, and a bond that had grown stronger than either had expected. Their feelings for each other continued to grow, unspoken at first, but increasingly evident in small actions and glances. John noticed the way Maria laughed when she succeeded at a task, the careful attention she gave to the animals, and the quiet moments when she looked at the horizon as if imagining something beyond the ranch. Maria noticed John's patience, his gentle guidance, and the respect he showed for her opinions and abilities. Love, in its quiet, patient form, was beginning to take root. Family connections, once a source of pressure, began to ease. Maria's parents recognized her growth and independence, realizing that the arrangement had not confined her, but had allowed her to thrive. They began to trust John, seeing him as someone who cared for their daughter genuinely and who provided a safe and supportive home. Letters from home were no longer filled with urgency or worry, but with pride and encouragement. The reassurance brought Maria peace and reinforced the stability of her life on the ranch. One day, John and Maria faced a small crisis that further strengthened their bond. A fire had started in one corner of the property due to dry conditions, threatening the barn and surrounding fields. They acted quickly, moving animals to safety, dousing flames where possible, and calling for assistance. The panic of the moment tested their coordination and courage, but they worked seamlessly, each anticipating the other's actions. By the end of the day, the fire was contained and the property was safe. Exhausted but relieved, they sat together, sharing a quiet moment of gratitude for each other's presence. Through all these experiences, John and Maria realized that their relationship had grown beyond the original arrangement. It was no longer defined by necessity, transaction, or obligation. It was defined by mutual respect, shared experience, and genuine care. They had learned to trust each other in moments of fear, hardship, and uncertainty. They had learned to communicate, compromise, and support one another in ways that were deeply meaningful. The ranch itself mirrored their relationship. Once, it had been a place of solitary labor for John, a landscape of routine and responsibility. Now it was a home filled with cooperation, shared memories, and subtle joy. Every repaired fence, every thriving animal, every garden in bloom was a symbol of their partnership and resilience. They had created something together that neither could have achieved alone. As months turned into years, the partnership solidified into something undeniable. They shared responsibilities, joys, and quiet moments of reflection. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, rooted in trust, respect, and the understanding that they were no longer two people brought together by circumstance. They were partners in life, companions in every sense of the word. Finally, one quiet evening after the day's work was done, John turned to Maria and spoke softly. "I don't know what I would have done without you," he said. Maria smiled, squeezing his hand gently. "And I don't know what I would have done without you either," she replied. There was no need for grand declarations or dramatic gestures. In that simple exchange, they both understood the depth of their connection. They had come far from the awkward beginnings, the doubts, and the uncertainties. They had found a life together that was real, meaningful, and filled with love. Their story, once defined by obligation and necessity, had become a story of partnership, resilience, and unexpected affection. They had faced storms, both literal and metaphorical, and emerged stronger, wiser, and closer. The ranch was thriving, the community respected them, and they had discovered a bond that neither had expected when their journey began. In the quiet moments, as the sun set over the vast plains, John and Maria would sit together, hand in hand, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. They had learned that life could be unpredictable, challenging, and difficult, but also rewarding, joyful, and full of unexpected connections. What had started as an arrangement born of necessity had blossomed into a true partnership, built on trust, respect, and the quiet growth of love. And so, life on the ranch continued, not as it had been before, but better. John and Maria faced each day together, working, laughing, learning, and supporting one another. The land around them was alive with the fruits of their labor, and their hearts were alive with the knowledge that, sometimes, the most unexpected beginnings can lead to the most meaningful endings.